European Union Referendum Bill, consideration of Lord's amendments.
Now.
Thank you. Order. I must draw the House's attention to the fact that Lord's Amendment 1 engages financial privilege. The first amendment to be taken is Lord's Amendment number 1. To move to disagree with the Lords in their Amendment number 1, I call the Minister, eager and expectant, Mr. John Penrose.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I beg to move that this House disagrees with Lord's Amendment 1. Since this House gave the bill its third reading in September, it's been thoroughly and extensively scrutinised at the other end of the building, and I should start by paying tribute to the noble Lords for their diligent and considered approach to this bill. For the most part, the scrutiny has been fruitful and the bill returns to this House improved in a great many ways. However, on just one issue, their noble Lordships took a decision that fundamentally differs from the view of the Government and indeed of this House. Amendment 1 would lower the voting age for the referendum to 16. This topic has now been debated and divided upon repeatedly since May's general election. Twice, this House has rejected a lower voting age for this bill, and a third time yesterday with a healthy majority in the Cities and Local Government Devolution Bill. This House has had this debate many times since May this year, and there are other colleagues, I appreciate, wishing to speak, so I shall endeavour to be brief. In short, the Government is not at all sure it's right to lower the voting age, and even if it was, this would not be the right way to do so. Voting age for UK parliamentary elections is set at 18, as it is in most other democracies in Europe and around the world, and the age of majority is a complex one. I happily give way.
The Scottish Parliament has lowered the voting age, so how does he justify to one of my constituents who turns 16 in the next month, who will be able to vote in Scottish Parliament elections in 2016, Council elections in 2017, but will be denied a vote in this referendum?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the honourable gentleman I'm sure is aware, the franchise for Scottish parliamentary elections is rightly devolved into a matter for Holyrood. But this is a decision which is to be taken in this place across the UK as a whole. It is not it's not a devolved matter, it is a reserved topic. And therefore, while it is entirely open for the Holyrood Parliament to take decisions for its franchise, and we all honour their ability to do so, it is, I'm afraid, an inevitable result of devolution that we will get different views in different parts of the country on those local or more locally national, if I can use that phrase, different franchises. Very briefly, then I shall try and make some progress.
I'm grateful to him on that point. Notwithstanding the answer that he's just given, would he not reflect that the participation of 16 and 17-year-olds in the referendum in Scotland, I think, went well, the voters behaved responsibly, and surely we ought to be taking advantage of the interest of 16 and 17-year-olds and their knowledge about these matters to support the coming EU referendum as well?
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's an entirely justifiable point, and it is very noticeable that the Scottish referendum resulted in an upwelling of democratic engagement, not just amongst 16 and 17-year-olds, but right the way through the age spectrum. I don't think that democratic engagement and involvement is the only test we should apply, but it is a factor which may weigh on other people's minds. The honourable gentleman is exactly right. But I don't think it's enough to justify on its own changing the franchise for either this bill. Let me make some progress, and perhaps I can explain my point a little more. As honourable members will appreciate, we currently have a patchwork of restrictions which apply to young people from the age of 16 all the way up to 21. There is no clear point at which a person becomes an adult, but it is at 18 that society usually draws the line. Even at 18, I will try and make some progress in a minute, but can I come back to the honourable gentleman in a minute? Even at 18, there are things which young people cannot do. They must wait until they're 21 to adopt a child, supervise a learner driver, or to drive a bus. In general, although I accept this isn't perfect, more things require parental consent for people under 18 than over. Joining the army, getting married, or having a drink in a pub when you're 16 need parental consent and approval. And the vast majority of other decisions where the consequences demand a careful, responsibly considered view, from serving on a jury to being tried as an adult to holding a tenancy, holding a mortgage, buying a house, all happen at 18. In fact, the last Labour government even raised the age for using a sunbed from 16 to 18. Mr. Speaker, it surely cannot be right to argue that someone aged 16 cannot be trusted to decide on the risks of getting a tan, but they can be trusted to choose who should govern the country. I give way to the
Thank the Minister for giving way. It was to follow up on the point that there is no defined age at which it would be reasonable to say somebody could vote. But my honourable friend made the point that in Scotland, people aged 16 were given a vote, they will have a vote in the future. How does the Minister explain to them, accepting that there's an allowance for different decision-making in the two places, but how do you explain to that young person that it's utterly legitimate for them to vote in Scottish Parliament, local government and referendum, but not this EU referendum?
Yeah, here.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think my answer is broadly speaking to that sort of hypothetical voter in Scotland, the same as I gave just now, which is that a consequence of devolution is that the Holyrood Parliament is allowed and perfectly entitled to take its decisions on devolved matters. This is a devolved matter, the Holyrood franchise, but also the referendum franchise and the general election franchise is a reserve matter. It's something for the entire country to decide on and to cover the entire country as a result of that. I'm going to have to make some progress, but I will happily give way the honour.
But doesn't he accept that this European Union referendum is a once-in-a-generation opportunity? And, of course, for young people, this will directly impact on their rights as European Union citizens to live, work and study in other EU member states.
Well, Mr. Speaker, he's absolutely right. It will affect all of us. But I'm afraid that the argument he's advancing applies equally well to 15-year-olds and 14-year-olds and indeed to 55-year-olds and 64-year-olds. So he is right, but I'm not sure it's necessarily a compelling argument for coming down just to 16. I'll give way once more and then I must make some progress.
I'm grateful to the Minister and he is being generous. Can I caution him, though, against invoking the somewhat patrician interests or instincts of the previous Labour government about the use of sunbeds as a reason for denying 16-year-olds the vote today. He's given us the full list of links, but surely the one link that matters, because it comes to the heart of what it is to be represented in this place, is that at 16 you pay your taxes.
Mr. Speaker, that, of course, is an idea which has a long and distinguished history. I mean, I think people were throwing tea into the harbour in Boston, saying no taxation without representation a great deal of time ago. I think, however, it's an argument which has grown weaker over time for a number of reasons. Firstly, that the number of 16 and 17-year-olds who now pay income tax, while not zero, is a great deal fewer than it used to be, partly at least because this government and the last one raised the threshold for income tax and also raised the school and training leaving age, so the number of people actually involved in paying income tax is now a great deal lower than it used to be, but also because there are now many more indirect taxes, and therefore any 6-year-old who buys whatever it may be will be paying VAT, amongst other things, and therefore I'm afraid that the advent of indirect taxes rather weakens the logical foundations of that argument, one which I used to cleave to myself, and I found myself in a slightly uncomfortable position as a result of that, because I realised it was being an eroded position. Can I make some progress, Mr. Speaker? Even if we were convinced that lowering the voting age was the right thing to do, this bill would not be the place to do it, for two reasons. Firstly, changing the voting age isn't something that should be applied to a single vote, or even, perhaps especially, if it is as important as this referendum. It's something that should be considered for all elections, collectively and in the round, not piecemeal in an ad hoc, case-by-case basis. Equally, given the understandable sensitivities surrounding the EU referendum, making such a fundamental change to the franchise for this vote alone, but not for others, would inevitably and perhaps justifiably lead to accusations of trying to fix the franchise in favour of either the Remain or the Leave campaign. That's why we have chosen to stick with the tried and tested, proven general election franchise. If it's good enough for choosing the government of this country, then surely it's good enough for the referendum too. And we should not jiggle around with it for a one-off tactical advantage either way. Once more, and then
I'm very grateful to him. But on that specific point, as far as I know, nobody has made any such complaint about the result of the Scottish referendum. And I don't understand why he feels that if it was done in this case, that criticism would be made here.
Well, I'm sure that the honourable gentleman has people in his own party who are concerned and may perhaps be on one side of this particular issue or another when it comes to the referendum itself and during that campaign. Equally, My party has people on both sides, and I think that there are huge sensitivities, even if they aren't being voiced terribly loudly at the moment, which need to be understood, need to be honoured, and we need to make sure that this is seen as a studiously fair election, and one which will therefore settle the issue for a very long time to come. Mr. Speaker, it's also worth pointing out that young people themselves, the very people we're debating enfranchising here today, aren't at all sure this would be a good idea. The most recent polls showed that while there's a reasonable majority of 16-year-olds in favour of this change, 17-year-olds do not support it overall, and just 36% of 18-year-olds are in favour. What that says about 18-year-olds' opinions of their younger selves 2 years earlier, Madam Deputy Speaker, I shall leave you to conclude. And there's also a solid majority against the change amongst all other adults over 18 as well. So I will give away once more, and then I will try and finish this point.
The Minister for giving away when he said that he couldn't, but does the Minister agree that in the run-up to the Scottish independence referendum, young people between the ages of 25 were resolutely opposed to extending the franchise to under-18s? After the referendum, they and almost everyone else in Scotland, including the leader of his own party in Scotland, very nearly unanimously agree that it was the right thing to do. The doubters have been persuaded.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I hope I can come on to that point in my next part of my remarks, because he's absolutely right. There is a solid majority right the way across the country at the moment against this change amongst all adults, as well as amongst 18-year-olds and, to a less extent, 17-year-olds. And what I think this shows is that this is not some great progressive cause where an oppressed minority is waiting to be liberated by enlightened public support. Quite the opposite, in fact. The risk is that for those watching our debate outside this chamber, it will seem like a Westminster bubble issue, a trendy obsession for an out-of-touch political class rather than a burning social crusade with widespread democratic support. Even worse, Madam Deputy Speaker, there may be a suspicion that some are supporting this motion because they feel they could gain some tawdry, tactical, party political advantage from it for one side or the other. None of these reasons would strengthen or help us as we decide on an issue as important for our country's future as whether we stay in the EU or leave. We should have no part in them. Finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to touch on the financial implications. Mr. Speaker has certified that this bill engages the Commons' financial privilege because extending the franchise to 16 and 17-year-olds for the referendum would cost extra. Madam Deputy Speaker, the cost is far from the only reason the Government disagrees with this amendment, but for procedural reasons, the House is not able to both waive privilege and disagree with the amendment. So I want to be clear. The Government disagrees with the proposal on lowering the voting age on principled as well as financial grounds. Once more, and then I'm going to stop and let other people have a go.
I'm grateful to the Minister because, in fact, this is probably the most novel aspect of our debate today. It is, of course, for the Speaker to certify whether financial privilege is invoked or not, but in fact it is for the Government to decide whether they are to take advantage of that. The Government didn't take advantage of that in relation to the 2014 Wales Bill for exactly the same issue. What's different now?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think I've just addressed that point, which is that we can't waive privilege and disagree with the amendment for other reasons. And therefore, we need to engage financial privilege, but also I'm taking the opportunity of this speech, I hope, Madam Deputy Speaker, and this debate to make sure that those other issues are given an airing as well. I hasten to add that there is nothing new in this. This is something which is a long-established precedent within this House. I shall leave it to the procedural experts to lecture us all on the historical antecedents of financial privilege, but I hasten we are not creating any sort of unusual precedent here. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have not sought to repeat or rebut every argument. It's been debated, as I said, many times in this chamber already, but I have, I hope, tried to give everybody a taste of some of the issues and to state the Government's position at least. The House has now expressed its view on this matter many times, and therefore I ask us all to repeat that view once more.